Hello, everyone. Welcome. Hi. Welcome. Hello. 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 Welcome to Beyond Small Talk every Thursday at the 4 o'clock hour. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jackie Janik. I'm a women's empowerment coach, helping women uncover their purpose and define their own path in the world. And today, yes, you are watching Beyond Small Talk. I am so honored and excited to have our co-host. She's a second-time offender. She was on our second episode. Her name is Danielle Fontus. Her handle is at Danny Dares. She's on already. Ooh, yay! So, real quick, again, at Danny Dares. Danny, raised in New York, currently daring in Chicago. She's a curator of conversation, connection, experiences, music, and vibes. And today our topic is called She Dares. Oh, so excited. Let's get her on. 1 second. Oh, I can't wait. Again, repeat offender. She's a beautiful co-host, and we're so excited to have her back on. Hi.
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Oops. How are you?
Good. I know I'm having a little technical difficulties,
Yeah,
but
just
all is good.
readjusting here. Okay.
Yeah, get all adjusted because we are going in today. We are going in, and I just
We
thank you so much
are.
for showing up today and being a second repeat offender, co-host on
Yeah,
Beyond
thanks
Small
for
Talk. Thank
having
you.
me again.
Anytime. You are always welcomed. So let's just jump in.
Let's do
Let's
it.
jump in. So how are you feeling today? How are you?
I feel like I'm good. I feel centered. Speaking of conversations, I had a good day of in-depth conversations yesterday with you ladies, with another group of friends that I have. So now that all of that has settled in, I feel good. I feel like I peeled back some layers yesterday that are good for me. So
Hmm.
here we are.
And it's interesting you said all through conversation. So again, today we're talking about she dares having those conversations that are
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable, that you may feel like can get a bit uneasy. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
some people could get aggressive back at you,
Mm-hmm.
or it might end up into arguments or like not a fun place that you want to go.
Right.
And but the reward from having them, and not only with others but with yourself, are you
Ex-
ready to have those talks with yourself?
exactly. Exactly. And that's
um
the thing. I think when I was thinking about uncomfortable conversations, I'm thinking, what's the range? There is a huge range. So I love that you talked about the conversations you have with yourself to the conversations you have with other people, and that discomfort can look like so many things. It can look like aggression, it can look like being vulnerable, it can look like all of that at the same time. So I'm excited to see where our conversation right now goes, because it can go in a variety of ways.
Completely. And so people know for Beyond Small Talk, one is called co-host because we're having that kind of conversation. It's not like
Mm-hmm.
an interview. It's and Beyond Small Talk, we're all about like going to those places, and I call it uncomfortable, joyfully uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I think what is really beneficial is that we both put ourselves in those situations. So
Mm-hmm.
again, if you're listening to this, we're the type of people that actually purposefully
Yep.
put ourselves in these conversations with other people and ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you get out of it? Like, why even do that to yourself?
Well, you mentioned it already. You said, like, what's on the other side of it? What's the benefit, or what's the reward of going there? I know, like, so the conversation I had with the first group of friends yesterday, we had an open discussion about fear and our relationship with fear. And we've been in these conversations. They can go to level 1, they can go to level 5, level 7, level 10. And because of my personality and the work we've done, I told my friends I'm pretty comfortable with maybe about a level 7. I'm pretty self-aware about things. I'll talk about emotions, past things, all of that. But then we got to the level 8 or 9, and it was it felt weird, and it felt, I don't want to keep using the word uncomfortable, but there was discomfort there. But once you're open, like I was, when we even started having the conversation, I said, you know what, let's do it. Let's go. Let's go there. That's my theme right now. Let's do it. Let's go there. because I know that once I push through that from the experience of past situations, that the person that I am on the other side of it, the assuredness I have, the certainty I have, the more alignment I have, it's so much more tangible. And I feel much more certain of myself in a way that I can now face the next level of whatever that looks like with myself or with other people. And there's something about that you can't, like, it's non-negotiable at that point. It's a feeling that I enjoy, and I really, really am happy about it. And it's not just with age, but with age and these kind of conversations, I feel the maturity that I've gotten over time, which feels really, really cool.
Yes, yes. I think if women understood what you got on like the other end of it, I always say like, what's my ROI? What's my
Yeah,
return on this investment of being uncomfortable? Like you said, I also like how you gauge your uncomfortable conversations and kind of, a little bit what you're getting into. And then,
mm-hmm,
like you said, when you're in the conversation, and it also depends on about the people you're having that conversation and
for
what
sure.
type of topic. So I like to relate it when I'm in Beyond Small Talk. For everyone knows, we also have an in-person, well, virtual in-person group where there's a small intimate group of us where it's really comfortable. You feel safe, you
Yeah,
don't feel
exactly.
judged, and to get into those topics of like, and I'm talking like not just deep secrets but honest feelings, and
Mm-hmm.
the like bringing up fears and shames and all that, is one area. And then there's other times when I get into these conversations, for example with my mother, and talking about like the current political environment,
Mm-hmm.
where it's no longer uncomfortable. It goes to like heated really
Right.
fast. And it's like, how do we start to, or if you have any examples, like how do we show up for these conversations? Well,
So
first you
I
have to kind of
actually,
decide you want to get into them, right? Like, okay,
right.
I'm willing and open and aware that if I have this kind of conversation on these topics, there will be growth at some
Mm-hmm.
level.
Right.
But how the next phase is like, how do you show up for them?
So I think you keep showing up. That's the thing. It's like
Mhm.
we keep showing up. You and I have been having these conversations for 10 years. So today it's much easier for us to just be like, oh yeah, I talk to a therapist, I do this, say all these things that are not a big deal anymore. But I can remember the first time I was in a conversation, one of our first circles, and you have to, like you said, establish that safe space. But in these last few months, there have been conversations that have not been safe spaces. And I've had to have conversations with myself about, okay, well, how willing am I to get involved in these conversations? And what I've noticed is that I've been paying attention to how I shied away from, or how I was showing up or not showing up in those conversations before, for a variety of reasons. One, not feeling safe. Two, not thinking my voice or my opinion or my perspective mattered enough. Or just kind of not being in the mood or having the emotional or the mental bandwidth for it. So I think, like you said, first we have to decide that we want to be a part of those conversations. And I think, too, we also have to come in not with an armor, but also with, there has to be a boundary. There has to be some kind of, like, you have to kind of give yourself your own safe word, I think, because there are
Mhm.
conversations, as much as I've been pushing myself to be a little more uncomfortable, there are situations that I'm not willing to be a part of. Or if it gets to a specific place, like if I'm having a conversation that gets too aggressive or too combative or too much of a debate,
Yeah.
and that's not what I'm interested in, or it's not the time or the place for it, there's a way to back out. There's a way to bow out gracefully and say, this is, how about we set aside a time for this? How about we cool down? Because I've also learned being emotional, and not to confuse that with being vulnerable, but being emotional isn't always the time to have those uncomfortable conversations, because that can change the conversation in a way that's not necessarily favorable. So, there are all these variables that I think are important. So I think it takes practice. Like anything else, I think it takes practice.
100%. And it's not saying that these uncomfortable conversations get any less uncomfortable. It's like you
Nope.
either go in another level of the topic, and and for everyone listening, we'll go on some of the topics. We're
Yeah.
just setting, Danny and I are laying the groundwork for you of like how to get into these conversations
Mm-hmm.
and why to do so, how to show up for them. And now it's like what are you willing or able, or I like how you say to have the bandwidth to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get into it. What conversations, like any uncomfortable conversation has been popping up in your life?
The range, right? So I told you
Yeah.
about the small group that I have that we've been meeting once a week at this point. So we've been meeting once a week, and honestly, those conversations can go up to, yesterday we met for 5 hours. Never planned to go that long, but it went for 5 hours. So we ended up talking about pulling back some of the layers of, you talk about fear, or you always think you have an agenda, and it almost always goes back to your family, always goes back to parents and childhood memories and all those things. And thankfully, we've established this safe space that we've had to explicitly share. We have your back. We are here. We trust that none of this stuff will ever be shared, like those kind of agreements, first of all,
Hmm.
to create the
Yeah.
container. And we've talked about it. We've talked about family. We've talked about relationships, money, all these things that are like these taboo conversations now. And we've been friends since 2014. We're in 2020. We now know each other in such a different and more intimate and such a different depth of a level, because now we're having conversations that we didn't have before. We knew each other's past boyfriends, girlfriends. We knew where each other lived. We knew those things before, but now we have each other's backs. So like, if like, when if we become like each other's honorary aunties and uncles, we know like that person at a different level. We understand them differently. We know if they're just not themselves. We know things differently about them now. We're much more intimately connected, which is cool. And I actually
Yeah.
had a different kind of conversation, because that's on the vulnerable side. Friend of mine. So in the past few months, we've had a lot of racial unrest and a lot of tension amongst even friends, friends, family,
Hmm.
coworkers, all of that. And I had a coworker and friend reach out to me one day and say, "Hey," so he wanted to participate in the idea of supporting Black businesses, and he is not Black. So he reached out to me and he said, I really, if I can get your opinion, and I appreciate that he did ask to, "Hey, can I ask you a question?" And kind of gave me the in or out if I wanted to participate or respond. And that's I think also important. Hey, or do you have the space for this right now? Because I don't know what you're doing with in your space when we start talking, right? So he
Hmm.
creates the space. I agree, because again, I'm always down. I said, "Hey, you can ask the question. I don't know if I have the answer." Because that's a fair. I had no idea where he was going. And he said, "Hey, so I went to support a business, and I was the only non-Black person there. And I thought about you, and I wondered, how do you navigate these spaces when you're the only or the minority?" And I
Mm.
just, in that moment, I felt really seen. Like, I felt it was comforting for him to even acknowledge that, because I've been used to being the minority or the only since I was in 10th grade. So I've learned the code switching. I've learned how to navigate, but I've also, I think, in ways, and not think, I know that I will shrink at times, because I am the minority. And it's like, oh, well, I don't know if that's appropriate. I don't know if they will understand. I don't know if that's acceptable in this environment. So for him to ask me that question, just, it helped me feel validated in my experience. And there was an opportunity for us now to have a dialogue that we both benefited from. I got to share, what does that look like for me, and I think it helped him not understand just me, but any other Black minority, whatever friends he has, what that looks like. And now he understands that on a deeper level. So that was a conversation that I applaud him, because he had to be uncomfortable in that situation and in that conversation. But for him to say it and to go there and to reach out and actually do something, I was impressed. I won't lie. I was impressed and very comforted by that. And I just feel like we got to connect on a different level doing that too, having that conversation.
Right, and if more people were willing to do that, because I always said it's really hard to hate close up. Like if you lean in and not saying like you hate, but like, what I'm saying, but like for people who don't know each other, just because, yeah, race is like a very obviously hot topic, especially with
Mm-hmm.
the political climate and, the vice president woman
Mm-hmm.
who is Black. And now I'm hearing the conversation, the narrative on the media on like, is she really Black? And, those kind of things where I'm like, you have to be willing to get in it to have that
Mm-hmm.
conversation, to bring it up and have the intent behind it, that I'm going in there as like I'm open. It sounded like he was open and willing and wanted to learn
Right.
and to acknowledge that he sees you, because I've also had similar conversations with my husband. My husband is Black and has been one of the only Black people in a room for a really, really long time since he was
Mm-hmm.
in, I believe, like kindergarten.
Okay.
And he has some of the same answers that you did, learning how to navigate a room and not being able to be you,
Yeah.
essentially, right? So I heard you say that shrink, like that word that
Mm-hmm.
in a conversation that you have to shrink. And I think color and also gender as a
Mm-hmm.
woman, that using our voice has not always been
Right.
accepted. It's still today in the political
Yeah.
climate that we're trying to shun a woman's voice and use words as nasty and things like that when
Mm-hmm.
she's just expressing like who she is and her point of view. So
Right.
we always have speak even when your voice shakes.
Man, that has been a game changer for me. It really, really has been. So back, like anyone who's known me since I was little, I used, like when I was younger, I was really, really shy. People don't like to believe it, but I was. I was really shy. And whenever I had to speak in front of a group, I would cry. I would cry in presentations, in performances, all of it, all the time.
You would
And
never know now. You would never ever know.
but I still know and I still have those feelings, but it's like when I
Mm,
start to hear my own voice shake is when
hmm
I'm like, oh no, people can tell I'm nervous. And that used to be the moment when I would start to cry because I'm like, oh, the jig is up, everyone knows. Now I would crumble. So now, like seeing that and just having the permission to, okay, maybe that's a vulnerable moment, maybe it's a sensitive topic, but keep going because it doesn't matter. Because just because you're being vulnerable or your voice is shaking doesn't mean what you're saying matters any less. And I've had moments where I'll feel it, and I think I felt it just now a little bit, and I'm like, oh girl, okay, just keep pushing or drink water, take a deep breath, whatever it is. But it's important. Like it's been big for me, and I think it's a big moment right now that we're having.
Oh, 100%. And it just, recently happened to me in my work environment
Mm,
where I felt, from coworkers, being spoken down to, being accused of completely crazy things. And, again, feeling a bit bullied around it. And I know it's a big word to use, but it's real and it happens. And I'm
mm-hmm.
an adult and it happens to adults too. So I
Yeah.
felt this, it happens to adults.
Yep.
It's not just in like the playground. Like adults do it to adults. Women do it to women, which, I
Mm-hmm.
always really, that's another conversation about like, do women really support women? Like, and what does that look like?
Right.
Right? Do we all really support each other? I don't think
And
so.
again, all of that's a choice. So I started
Hmm
watching, again, just like wherever you found your own discomfort. I started watching or did an online training for diversity inclusion because I was like, okay, well, I understand diversity and inclusion because I am a minority. But what does that look like beyond my experience? And how do I
hmm
better equip myself to not only see it, but to identify it, you know, more accurately and I guess in a bigger system and then also address it and be a solution. Like we have to be solutions. We
hmm
can't just keep complaining about things. And it was interesting because I learned they had a whole segment about unconscious bias. And it's funny because if you really think about it, we all have some unconscious bias, whether we realize it or not. Well, that's the point of unconscious, but it's it's so simple. It can be as simple as like it can be as simple as you see someone with curly hair versus someone with straight hair. And it doesn't matter what gender that person is, what color shirt
hmm
they're wearing, none of that matters, but you can have a response or you can have a thought, you can have a judgment about that person immediately because part of the way we navigate is we take in information and we respond accordingly. And that just opened my eyes to and not to excuse anyone who is consciously hating someone else, not to excuse that at all,
Right.
but at the same time further understanding how some of these the microaggressions, the things that happen very sleight of hand, very simple things can happen over time and just create these dynamics where the tension goes further and further apart. And then you start bringing in people's own experiences and things like that. Like you're saying, it's harder to hate up close if you've never had a Black friend, if you've never had a gay friend, if you've never had, if you've never had experience with these
hmm
people, these lifestyles, these cultures, and these influences. there's that divide, and it is harder to bridge that gap. So I think part of, these conversations are what are helpful in bridging some of those gaps.
Oh, 100%. And even, how you were saying creating that container. So I know a friend is on here and we were having one of those conversations around unconscious biases. And
Mm-hmm.
we both feel like we're, pretty progressive and open and have, amongst different communities and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And a few years ago, and I was comfortable enough to like have this conversation with her because you're saying create that container as one space so you're able to open up because some of these thoughts, these unconscious thoughts that then you realize that you just had it, for me has felt a bit shameful and also like judging on myself like, what am I, such an idiot? I'm 44 years old. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
say it out and I'm saying one example. About 2 years ago, I was working and my company is very, my day job is very culturally diverse. And there
Mm-hmm.
was a young girl I'm quite friendly with, and she's Indian. And heard there was kids coming around taking candy, and I gave someone candy, they gave it back, and I went, "Don't be an Indian. Get." I almost said because I'm 44. When I was a child in kindergarten, one
Mm-hmm.
of those things that was always said was, "Don't be an Indian giver."
Mm-hmm.
Like a bulb went off in my head, and I said,
Yeah.
"What the frick am I saying? And what have I been taught my entire time
Right.
in elementary school?"
And isn't
I mean,
that wild that there are phrases like that and other things, some of them we don't even know the origin of, but are offensive, and we may not know or do the due diligence to find out or figure it out. They're just like a whole bunch of
there's
jargon
tons,
phrases.
like all the time. And I know people are like,
Yeah.
"Oh, you're being so sensitive. This is like so un-PC of you, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, all right, okay, fine. There's some where I'm like, okay, or whatever. But like that specific sentence that I was going to
Mm-hmm.
say, and now that I think about it more and more and look at I was like, that's just wrong. Like wrong on every level, wrong
Yeah.
on like history, like wrong, but what I've been taught. So that's where I'm feeling like even approaching people to have these conversations, especially amongst people, I am 10 years older than you. And what we've learned and been ingrained in us
Right.
is like, you don't even challenge it. Like, you don't
Mm-hmm.
even like bring it up. And I was like, no, these are worth those conversations. And again, saying, how do we have them? And I think we both come up with the first thing is creating that container of people you feel safe
Yeah.
to even start opening your mind and thinking different ways than what we've been, you know, taught. So
Mm-hmm. And
open up our
allowed.
unconsciousness
Mm-hmm.
into becoming more conscious.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's being more conscious. We're seeing this awakening, this confrontation of what has been okay because no one stepped up to do anything about it, and where we are as a result. So now if we take the time and put in the effort to do more and hold ourselves accountable as well, because
Mm-hmm.
it could be, I could be like, well, I'm Black, I get what diversity is, but that doesn't mean that my experience is the same as someone else's experience. I would be just as guilty if I don't challenge myself and also learn how to better to be an ally for somebody else, some other group, or or even share from my experience to someone who doesn't understand my experience, because that's part of it too. Is in the cross racial conversations, it was like, well, I don't feel like being the spokesperson for Black people because my experience isn't everybody's
Right.
experience. And it's like, I don't know, like I didn't have the, I don't know if the confidence is the right word. I didn't have the, I didn't trust my perspective enough in certain situations. So I wouldn't speak up. And again, I've been the only woman, the only Black person, and the only Black woman in so many scenarios, and would just not say anything because I didn't want to put myself in a situation to be looked at any more harshly or deeply.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's easier to fit in because it's like, oh well, I fit in enough, so why do I want to ruffle feathers at this point? So, and it's, but who is that helping? That's not helping the entire group move forward or be more progressive or understand better if I don't say something. And I'm not saying I have to say something all the time. You pick your battles, because there are times where I have learned to pick my battles, but also learning when can you push a little more, when can you step up and speak up a little more.
For sure. Even when your voice shakes, right? Even when your
Yup,
voice
and
shakes.
keep doing it.
Yeah, because it takes practice and your voice matters. And,
Mm-hmm.
being in those conversations, just like, hearing you speak, I'm so intent, like listening to all your words because I just love your insight. But I remember in our last conversation, you talked about being in a restaurant and one
Mm-hmm.
table, it's the same environment, everyone's listening to the same music, eating
Mm-hmm.
the same type of food, having maybe even the same waitress, and they can be at different tables and one's getting engaged, one's getting dumped, one is like
Yeah.
celebrating this, one
Yeah.
is just like life sucked, like you could all be in that but have different experiences and perspective. So when we get in these conversations, we use our voices, we can share what this whole looks like.
Mm-hmm.
I love that comparison that you did, that analogy you did, that was just
And
so
you think
great, just
about
to,
it, that is because I've thought about that example again. Like that is the experience that so many of us have had where we could be in a meeting with 12 different kinds of people from in all different kinds of backgrounds and all having different experiences. And I've had conversations with past coworkers, past friends, where we've kind of dissected some of those conversations of, remember that day when this happened and like we didn't, maybe at the time we didn't talk about it because so like here's an example. I was in a situation where a gentleman was upset, and it was always my job, being in events and hospitality, to come and diffuse the situation and find whatever the solution is. And I went to this gentleman, and he was not having it with me. He wasn't. And I did the tools, I did the things to figure out what he needed and figure out how to be the solution for him. And he wasn't having it. So I went to a coworker and I said, hey, this person it's not working out well for you. How about you go and see if you can help him? And in that moment, I said, he might respond differently to you. And again, in that moment, I don't know if he's upset because he's upset. I don't know if he's not taking well to me because I'm a woman, because I'm Black, because I look young, whatever the scenario is. Who knows? He
mm,
could be having a bad day. I don't know. But when I told my coworker that, I'm having all of those thoughts, and I don't know if my coworker said, okay, well, maybe Danielle's having a hard time because he might not have had to think about that because he never had to. And we never talked about it later because, again, I don't want to be oh, well, he was mean to me because I'm a Black woman. I didn't want to do
mm-hmm.
that because I was also in that point frustrated with the whole situation. And then it was funny because my coworker came back and said, okay, well, he's fine now. And in my head, I was like, okay, well, you're a white male. Like, you have a different
Mm-hmm.
response to people. And it's not that people are always racist. It can be, a variety of things with this
Mm-hmm.
level of bias we have and whatever. But I had a very different experience in that scenario than he did. And he will probably never, he doesn't have to think about that. So we've had some of those conversations of like, hey, remember that scenario? Well, I think that guy wasn't feeling me because of this. But again, I don't know that. And in the
Right.
moment, it wasn't even, in that moment, it wasn't appropriate to have that conversation. But now we can. Or we could have had it at the end of the day or something like that. So yeah, we are having different experiences, and it's tricky because you're like, but I was there. That person wasn't being mean to you. They were rude to all
Right.
of us. And it's like, that's not always true.
Right.
It's not always true. And these conversations help us just be more aware in those scenarios for sure.
Right, and just more, not maybe not exactly yours, but just having some kind of like compassion or understanding that
Mm-hmm.
maybe, who knows? Like you said, he could range from like the biggest a-hole ever to maybe like he just had someone like die on him. Like you just don't know
Who
these
knows?
conversations, right? And we
Right.
could create stories in our head and all those things, but just, just having the talk around it just makes people aware that people are going through different things at all times and you just don't know everything.
Right.
And it's all okay, but as long as keeping up the awareness around these things.
Right.
And how about for any of our listeners, I want to like encourage you. First, feel free to ask us any questions
Yeah,
that,
questions
and
would
we
be
can ask.
fun.
We love questions
I see
that,
Jess in here. I see Kim in here. Some fun friends in here.
Yeah, well, feel free, ask a question. And I want to encourage everyone on and everyone listening in the future. Danny, what would you suggest, like a question to ask them? Do they have something that they want to talk to someone else about that's maybe been pent up? Or do they want to ask themselves a question? And having these dialogues with yourselves is just as important too,
Yeah.
whether we go out like I like to literally talk to myself. So when I'm in the car, I'm just
Hmm.
talking away to myself, right? So, and now with these things, you never know who anyone's talking, right? Or other people, when they have those conversations, tend to journal it out.
Hmm.
Um, do you have any tips? Like, any tips for the listeners to be like, this is how to start a conversation? Or maybe, yeah, go ahead, any tips?
Honestly, I think the first step is paying attention. So we can go through a day and just go about our lives, be doing whatever we're doing, so focused on the next cup of coffee, the next meeting, the next email, the next this, the next everything, that we're just not actually even paying attention. And I remember when I was going to my therapist in New York, I would always ask for homework because I like homework. He'd say, "I want you to pay attention." And I was like, "That's dumb homework." Like I want to do something. But he's like, "I want you to pay attention. Like, just pay attention to people around you. Pay attention to how you react. Pay attention to things that make you feel a way. Pay attention to your thoughts." So now I think, like, now I'm much more aware where I'm paying attention to dynamics. I'm paying attention to um, how coworkers respond to other coworkers, paying attention to how friends respond to each other, paying attention to, if I'm watching a commercial, what did I assume about the people in the commercial? Just anything like that. Like, paying attention has been an eye-opening experience because there are so many things happening around us that we are not realizing. And you can live in your own bubble if you want to and be like, yeah, we live in a post-racial America where this isn't happening, or, gay people have rights to get married, so everything's fine now. And it's like, that's not, yes, and that's all not completely true. People are still having challenging experiences. People are still going through things, and things are happening. So I think paying attention is the first thing. And I think if there was a question to start the conversation, I can't think of a specific question, but I would say to remember the difference between a debate and a discussion. I've been paying attention. I've been watching people in the Facebook comments because it's a spiral that's hard to get
A
out of.
debate and discussion. That's really nice. So Kimberly did put a comment in here,
Mm-hmm.
enjoying this combo. Thank you. Currently dealing with an awkward friend situation, and we're having the
Mm.
conversation this Sunday. So I'm
Ooh.
crossing my fingers about how it will go. And that's a good point, debate versus discussion. Like, how does she want to show up to the conversation?
Mm-hmm. And
That's
that's the thing
one.
is, you can go into these conversations and sometimes people have not an agenda in a malicious way, but you're like, I believe that I'm right and I'm going to prove to you why I'm right. And that's not going to get us to understand each other. If I'm just listening to the point to debate about, or just here to prove that I'm right and prove my point, I'm missing, or I'm probably not really listening to what you're saying and the opportunity to learn something. Do I have to agree with everything you say? No. Do I have to understand everything you say? Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But the least we can do is listen to each other. And that's what's
Right.
been tricky, is that everyone is not listening as much as we are talking. And that's problematic to
And
me.
right. And as you say, listen is like actively listen. So I think a lot of people listen to just respond
Mm-hmm.
versus, listen to actually listen. And I think part of like an actual, like for Kimberly, like this discussion is, I love your, first of all, debate versus discussion.
Mm.
Such a gem. Everyone should really keep that in the mind, like when they're
Yes.
having this
A helpful
debate
distinction.
versus discussion. And also, how do you actively listen, and acknowledge someone's feelings? Like
Yeah.
how you had that conversation with your friend and he acknowledged you and you were seen. So,
Mm-hmm.
and also that I feel like that could, if it gets a bit heated, it diffuses. When people are seen and felt seen
Mm-hmm.
and heard, it kind of diffuses and can move from a debate to a discussion.
Right. And let's see, the
She,
millennial in motion said something.
uh, the millennial was a co-host. She's wonderful. Let's see, what,
Nice.
what did she say?
So
Sometimes
sometimes
people
people
tend, Sorry, go ahead.
Sometimes people tend to not think about things from others' perspectives. I agree with that. How do you handle situations with individuals who can't imagine how others feel, or like you said, might not pay attention? That's a good question, because that's where you have this sliding scale of, does that person want to pay attention? Because I've been in conversations too where I'm offering a perspective, and I am very deliberate about being a person who can think from other people's perspectives and communicate to different people. Like, that is something I take very seriously. And I've been in conversations with people who didn't want to understand anything other than their perspective. And to be honest, that's where I've offered my piece. I did my part and I stepped away from it. Because you're not going to win every conversation. And not that it's about winning, but you're not going to convince everyone. You're not going to change everyone's heart in a moment. That's just the reality. If someone has spent 34 years of their life learning one thing, today is not going to be that day. But you can keep having those conversations. That might be the gateway conversation to the next person, or your next interaction, or them just paying attention more often, or who knows what. So we keep doing it, but if they can't, or they won't, and they don't want to, I will gracefully bow out.
But yeah, sometimes the best conversations is the one not had, right? Like if they just not available. Maybe they're not available, Michelle. Maybe, and like you said, it's a gateway conversation. Maybe it might take 20 or 30 of them. And I felt like that with my mom, it takes a lot of conversation and a lot of just discussion for her to even just move that needle a little bit, to maybe not agree with something, but at least
Right.
be open to the concept. I was wondering if she was on. I
Exactly.
love
And
talking
I
about
love
her.
that, the moving of the needle. That's like, hopefully we're moving needles day by day by
Just a
day,
little bit. Yeah.
And
Um,
Patia had a question.
mhm.
So I'd love to know how we can forgive ourselves on those days when we either didn't speak up, or when we weren't as articulate as we would have liked. Ooh, yeah. I think we have to give ourselves permission to remember that we weren't ready. We weren't ready. Like I shared before, I have not always been this vocal. And I'm still, honestly, may not be the most vocal in every scenario, because that's, where's your threshold, and what does that look like? And I would say, Patia, start to pay attention to when you, like, how are you now handling those situations? And what does that need to look like for you, of how can you start to play with it? I always say this double dutch thing. How can you, like, double dutch and play with, how comfortable am I today? Maybe I say the thing that is a little more uncomfortable than I would have done last time. How do I keep talking when my voice shakes? How do I step up now? And I think by being better, it starts to help us. I don't want to say erase from before, because that's not true, but I think better, you do better. So the
Mhm.
more we know, the better we do. And I think we all grow in that process. So I have to forgive yourself, girl, because we are human. Like, that's the thing too, is we're human. We're all
I
evolving.
say,
There's still things. We're
right,
not we're not perfect. That's life.
totally. And if you give, I say you give your all every day, and some days that looks like 120%, and some days it looks like 50%. Some days you
Those days
brush your
I'm like,
teeth,
I'm
other
here.
days you do full glam.
Yeah.
Like it is just is, and it's all okay. It's just all okay. So that leads into our final question, and I like to end
Mm-hmm.
with giving some, tips and tools on self-care. Really believe that in unconventional ways of self-care, that it goes beyond mani and pedis. Not that I don't love them, but there's a lot more to self-care
Yeah.
than that, than the outer. There's a lot of inner work. Do you have any tips that you can share?
Yeah. So I actually, what my self-care looks like right now, and I've been calling it my
Yeah.
quarantine kit, is, it has really been honoring myself. And as simple as that sounds, what that can look like is not answering text messages right away. Because we have this temptation. We think we have to respond right away. We have to give all the time. And I'm realizing that I need to make sure that I'm not giving as much all the time in a way that depletes me. So creating the container to just keep myself fueled, and that looks like not answering text messages at times. It looks like putting my phone down a lot more and having no phone time, like you were sharing about, eating a meal without looking at my phone, without looking at your
Mm-hmm.
phone, going for walks. And the things that are uncomfortable right now are pushing myself a little more physically. So I bought a yoga mat yesterday because
Yeah.
I I don't enjoy yoga, but I enjoy the benefit. I appreciate the benefit of it. So pushing myself to do things that are, again, uncomfortable, because yoga's surprisingly hard.
It
But
is. It
yoga's
is.
surprisingly hard. So doing those things that, even though I don't necessarily want to do them, I'm choosing to do them because I understand and appreciate the benefit of them. So and then the social media tapping out at times has been important, especially Facebook, because I've gone down some spirals. So those are things that have been important for me right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Wise
Thank
words and having
you.
these
Of
conversations
course.
with you. Oh, and if anybody else has any questions, feel free or hit up at Danny Dares or
Mm-hmm.
myself as well. This will be
Yeah.
on IGTV and now on
Mm-hmm.
Spotify. Woo woo.
I
So I'll
saw
be sharing.
that. I
Yeah, so
love
we're
it.
podcast now on Spotify. So carry us wherever you're going later today or
I
anytime this
love that.
weekend. But catch up, and I really encourage everyone who's listening to have the courage to have one of those uncomfortable conversations. It takes practice, but like we said, there's a lots of benefits and rewards and just evolvement and transformation. And you might be
Mm-hmm.
really surprised of what you learn and find out about somebody else. So
Yeah.
thank you, Danny. Thank you so
And
much.
Jackie, thank you for creating this space, because it is important for us to keep having these
Oh,
conversations. And it might, for people who are watching, it might look easy to just say, oh, well, she does this thing every week. But I applaud you and love how much effort you continuously put into it. Like, you want it to be
oh,
good, you
thank
want it to be meaningful, and you put in the work to expand your audience and make it something, even if you don't know what it looks like 10 years from now. And I just feel like that's important. I hope that you feel that as well. So I wanted to say that, I acknowledge that for you.
thank you so much. That means a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, love you to death. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Just remember, tune in Beyond Small Talk every Thursday,
Mm-hmm.
4 o'clock hour, right here live, or catch us on IGTV or Shopify. Why did I was going to say that? Spotify. What the frick? Anyway, or YouTube. We're on YouTube too if
And
you want to
YouTube,
catch our
yep.
faces and see how
Doing
pretty
things.
Danny looks
All the
today. Check
platforms.
us out there too. Thank you so much. Bye.
Talk